Hey everybody, JJ here, bull to the bust. It is Friday. Hope you're having a happy Friday. I'm having a pretty happy Friday. I'm working at home today. We are on lockdown here in California. And we got a couple topics to touch on today. We're going to talk about the lockdown, the economic slowdown. 56% of Californians could be infected. We're going to tell you who said that and why. And the financial crash, worse than the Great Depression so far. Let's get into it. Now here is the steepness of the decline in the S&P 500. Now when we look back at the previous declines, the 1929 before the Great Depression and the 1987 crash, we see that those played out over a longer period, about 38 days for the 87 decline and about 40 days before the Great Depression there in 1929. So this collapse that we have witnessed here is just as bad or worse than the previous two major declines. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to continue. It could get worse. It depends on the sickness outbreak. And let's talk about what's happening here. We're under quarantine essentially here. We're ordered to stay at home by the governor, Governor Newsom, or I should say Dr. Newsom, because he's predicting some pretty dire numbers for us Californians. Let's take a look at his predictions here. Okay, this was a statewide order from Newsom here to effectively stay at home starting on Thursday, which was yesterday. Now, the thing about it is he said it's not going to be enforced by law enforcement, and he says people should use their own discretion, but he's urging that people only go out for quote-unquote essential reasons. Now, that's a very subjective word to use. What is essential? Well, to many, essential would be only in an emergency, to go get medicine, to go pick up food. Other people have a different definition of essential. Some people say it's essential that I go shopping because I'm a shopping addict and I don't want to go through withdrawals. So I need to go to Target to shop for shoes, right? Everybody's got their own definition. So he's using very general terms and general words that could be subject to definition or subject to interpretation, I should say. This stay-at-home order is going to be in effect until further notice. Essential services is what they're saying is pharmacies, grocery stores, takeout and delivery, restaurants, and banks. And the way he's describing it is that there's going to be a social contract. And instead of enforcing this by law enforcement and police, it's going to be social pressure that's going to encourage people to, quote, do the right thing, is what he said. Right? So let's say you go out of the house and somebody sees you, and if they look at you and they don't think you're doing something that's essential, then they're going to shame you. They're going to shake their finger at you and say, no, no, no. But then that's when you look at them and you shake your finger back at them and say, no, 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 you're also out here. What are you doing? You don't look like you're doing anything essential. So stop looking at me. Move along. Right? So all this is just crazy. But let's take a look at some of the numbers here that Newsom says could be infected. And he's using the word could. Now, Newsom is saying that 56% of Californians could get coronavirus. So 56% could get coronavirus, okay? So 60%, that's impossible. That couldn't happen, right? Why not just say 100%? I mean, it's possible, right? Why not say 10%? 10% is possible too, right? So the word could tells me that this number is just being thrown out there, and they probably made it a little bit more than 50% to make people think, well, most people are at risk. But of course, a lot of things could happen. Okay, you could win the lotto, right? And I'm not comparing the odds here for the lotto, but I'm just saying that this seems like a very big guessing game here as far as this prediction here, this projection of 56%. Now, to put that into perspective, 56% of the population getting infected could be 25.5 million people here in California. Right? They're also calling up the National Guard here to distribute food to people in need. Now let's take a look at some of the predictions that are out there as far as the Great Depression comparisons. Goldman Sachs now says GDP will shrink 24% next quarter amid the outbreak, which could be 2.5 times bigger than any decline in history. So that could exceed the decline during the Great Depression. Now the previous chart, we looked at the S&P 500 and that plunge, and it does equal the steepness and the severeness of those previous declines. But a decline in GDP of 24%, that would take us into uncharted territory. And they're not using the word could, they're saying will. Will shrink 24% in the next quarter. So apparently they have a crystal ball too, and they know exactly what's going to happen. And apparently they're looking into the future, and they're saying that there's not going to be any cure, no treatment, that this outbreak's only going to get worse. Well, we'll have to see how this plays out, and we'll look back on this and see how Goldman Sachs' words today, how accurate they're going to be here in a few months when we look back. Now the markets, they continue to be destroyed. Today another 4.5% off the Dow Jones. That was a $913 point decline. S&P 500, NASDAQ also similar, down over 4% today. Gold, not much of a bid, still right around 1,500. Oil got slammed down to $23.60 per barrel. All right, now what's going to happen through all this? Well, I do think the country and the citizens here in the United States, where I'm at, I think we're headed for some very dire straits. And there's been so many people out there just living without knowing anything about what's happening behind the scenes in the financial system, how it's based on fraud, it's a Ponzi scheme, how the banks, they get to issue debt created out of nothing, just type it up out of thin air, type it up on a keyboard, put it up on a digital screen and send you the monthly bills. And when consumers and when the working class finally starts to default or starts to get late on their credit card payments or their car loans, then guess what? They're just going to get bailed out from the central bank, or just like what happened recently they'll lower the reserve requirements for the bank. So now the banks will need even less assistance from the Fed, because essentially they can create unlimited amounts of money out of nothing, out of a push of a button. Now imagine if you or I had that type of power. We can go ahead and type up as much money as we want, just push a bunch of zeros and lend it out to people, and then charge them interest. And when they don't pay it on time, charge them late fees, right? While making millions and millions of dollars in bonuses and stock buybacks, where the insiders, they can go ahead and sell the stock after they buy it back and push up the price. Now there's been a lot of talk here about this what some are calling an economic takeover by the government. Now there's some people out there, some financial analysts, some economic pundits that are really freaking out about this thing. They're saying it's government overreach, and it's a complete takeover of what could be a complete takeover of the private sector, including private businesses and corporations, and all resources associated. Now this is the Defense Production Act, and it was a recent announcement that Trump came out with amidst this task force that he made for the current situation. Now let me tell you the way that the president described it. Let me tell you what it could potentially lead to here. Here's how he described it, the president. Quote, "We'll be invoking the Defense Production Act just in case we need it." In other words, I think you will know what it is. It can do a lot of good things if we need it, and we will have it all completed, signing it in just a little while. Right after I'm finished with this conference, I'll be signing it. Now later on Twitter, he verified, or he rather clarified the following quote. He said, "Invoke it in a worst case scenario in the future." Now one of the things this does, he's right, it can be used for good. It can also be very, very bad, as in communism, where the government pretty much runs everything and there's no private businesses. Well, if you look at the system in the US, we're not far from that right now. The government's pretty much involved in everything, right? Try to run a business without getting licenses. Try to make any money without having to pay taxes to the government, right? We're already in basically a communist style system here, where the government has their hands in everything, right? You name it, healthcare. You can't get a job without filling out a tax form. You can't run a business without getting the proper licenses. You can't drive a car, right? Both personal and business things. It's all under the thumb of big government. And that's the way it is. It's a communist type of system already. Some people might call it fascism, where the government basically either one controls or two dictates what's going to happen with these transactions. Now this law, or this act, this Defense Production Act, it was intended to help with the allocation of resources, products, facilities, and essentially makes available several authorities to the president. So yeah, he could be a complete dictator. Now the executive branch under this law, they can dictate industry production. They can force companies to sign contracts telling them how to allocate materials. The president can also impose wage and price controls, settle labor disputes, control credit, among many other far-reaching authorities. Now this act, this Defense Production Act that was passed during the Korean War back in the 1950s, and it's been used sporadically since then. Okay, so you see what they're doing. They are using this pandemic, this outbreak, to take over everything, complete bailouts for not just the too big to fail financial institutions, right? Airliners, cruise ships, the travel industry, the automobile industry is going to need a bailout. Right? All of these industries and these big companies were ran very, very greedily, right? So many people would say, well, can it get much worse? I mean, look at the mess that we're already in with quote unquote private businesses. Could it get much worse? Well, maybe, but maybe not. All right, so am I scared? No, not really. Can it get much worse? Yeah. But something had to change. Eventually, something was going to change. The system was going to collapse. We all need to be prepared for the next, not just shoe, the next shoes to drop, and they're going to be big ones, and they might hit us right on the head if we're not prepared. So everybody, thanks for watching. Prepare for the bear, and we hope to see you here next time on the channel. Bye, everybody.